Is the economy really that good? Is it going the way we thought it is? All this and more on the Self Evident Podcast. All right, guys, welcome to the Self Evident Podcast. You got Mike. Massey is not here. That is true, but that's all right. You got me rolling. And Massey and I had talked about the economy because, of course, what you're hearing about from especially the Biden administration, the Harris administration is really what it is. Let's be real. The economy's great. Everything's good. Everything's fine. It's all great. But the question is it really? And Massey had pointed out something to me yesterday. Chapter 11 bankruptcies. So we're going to talk about that. I know that sounds boring. I get it. But there's something interesting going on, and this stuff fascinates me. And you may remember we talked a little while ago about like, is there a collapse? Is it all going to fall apart? And the question is it? No, I don't think that there is a world-ending collapse that's coming around tomorrow. But Massey had pointed out these Chapter 11 bankruptcies. And, ooh, that's interesting. So I look through it, and I will say there's a couple of red flags that I see that it points to a larger picture, I guess, is what we could say. And so we're going to look at this. We're just going to see, hey, what's going on? I am going to add a couple of slides, so stick with me because these slides I really think are important to this talk. Okay, I uploaded those. But let's start with Chapter 11 bankruptcies. What's going on here? So what is a Chapter 11? This is where basically a company says, okay, we can't fulfill our debt obligations, we're going bankrupt, and it's a reorganization of the company. Really, it's that's what it is. So they come out with a plan of like, we're reorganizing, we're going to do this and this and this, and they reset. And now, what I did was I compared the past 4 years, because of course, COVID 2020 to 2024. I mean, COVID was in full swing 2021, but you get the point. Past 4 years, which would be the Biden administration, compared that to the 10 years preceding. Now, what did I find? Now, in the early stages of COVID, you did have a decline in Chapter 11s. Now, that's probably because of those PPP loans that everybody was taking advantage of, and plenty of people were, stealing, and then stimulus checks, and the government was really trying to keep businesses afloat while telling them they couldn't do business. Either way, however, Chapter 11 filings have surged, right? More and more companies are saying we can't make it. We got to go Chapter 11, particularly in 23, 24. So in 24, especially saw a rise. Hear this number. Commercial filings are up 70% year over year as of mid 2024. That to me is a red flag. Now, in the decade before that, relatively low, and data showed it was low and stable. And you want to know what times we've seen numbers like that, percentages like that? The 2007, 2009 Great Recession. We saw massive jumps in corporate filings driven by the collapses of organizations like General Motors and Lehman Brothers. And we saw kind of a bloodbath. Can't say that, right? We saw a bloodbath back in the Great Recession. But we also saw it in the dot-com bubble burst. This drove a ton of Chapter 11s. Though even that Chapter 11 rate was lower than it is today. That's a red flag right there. That is a signal. And I know last time when we covered all this economic stuff, we were talking like, there are some pieces that are a little bit of red flag. This to me, there's a string I'm going to put together for you that I think, okay, there's an issue here. Now, I'm not giving any type of financial advice, investment advice, nothing like that. But this stuff fascinates me. And I'm so tired of government telling us, oh, it's all okay. It's all okay. Right. And of course, now you're hearing Biden administration telling you, oh, well, inflation's going down and interest rates are going down, which they are. We're not going to argue that. Now, the question is, what was it not just a couple of years ago? And they're telling you unemployment rates are down. It's kind of like, look over here, look over here, see the birdie. What's going on behind the scenes? And that's really what I want to get into. And this chapter 11 stuff was really that door that opened to all of this for me. Now, so remember that number. We got 70% year over year, chapter 11's, it's up 70%. I remember we talked a little bit about this concept of commercial property, real estate, right? So think high-rise buildings. It's not necessarily one company that consumes all the floors in a high-rise. Think of it as an apartment building for businesses, right? So you may have 200 businesses in a high-rise, and they're renting out various levels of real estate, right? Commercial property is getting hammered right now. And I'm not saying it's going to completely collapse, but there are a lot of flashing signals on this. And think back to COVID. What did we have? We had the work from home movement, and companies have tried to kind of bring back the be in office requirements, but it's been sluggish. Plus, I was telling a friend this not too long ago. I've noticed job postings have been more and more remote, work from home, at least part of the time. When you do that, you reduce your need for office space, physical office space, right? Now, buildings are failing to secure businesses to rent space, and the buildings themselves, because of this, they're losing value and they're falling behind on maintenance, which continues to reduce the value. So, office property defaults. This is where I can't pay it. I'm going in default. I'm done. In commercial mortgage-backed securities, so these are, we talked about, like these securities, these collections of these things, are expected to reach 8.1%, rising to 9.9% by 2025. That's shy under 10%, 1/10 going into default. And these increases they're driven by high interest rates, vacancies are increasing, and obviously a large volume of debt. How much debt? Nearly 1 trillion of commercial real estate debt is due to mature in 2024. This is a threatening mass of delinquencies, right? So think about it. When interest rates are higher, credit has tightened a little bit, and banks are recognizing that the environment of office buildings, they're filled to the brim with middle class, educated, white collar labor. This is most likely shifting away. Mind you, all this sitting on a massive debt bomb that is about to mature. There doesn't seem to be a relief in sight, especially when you consider where all the jobs are going. Now, I'm going to show you a chart. Those of you listening, you're not going to see this chart, but it's okay. I'll describe it. Look at this chart. Now, this chart, this is native versus foreign-born workers. Now, you notice the massive dip in 2020, and those of you viewing, you're going to see there's a runaway on foreign-born workers versus native-born workers. So what do the numbers mean? So native worker jobs, they've really been unchanged in the past 6 years. This means they haven't really added native worker jobs, while the growth of foreign worker jobs is at an absolute record high. So don't forget, a while ago, Biden administration, they were saying, oh yeah, the numbers are great. And the government Bureau of Labor Statistics, they revised their numbers when they removed 818,000 jobs in the past year that the government was boasting about. Poof, thin air. 818,000. That's almost a million jobs that the government was off on what they were saying, right? So the August jobs report, this one. These stats, when you start to put them together, it's like, oh, questionable, right? August jobs report showed a loss of 438,000 full-time jobs. A loss of 438,000 full-time jobs with an increase of 527,000 part-time jobs. So massive loss of full-time, massive gain in part-time, which part-time pays lower, not as much benefits. It's tougher because you're going to get a record high of people who are working part-time jobs. If you look at true job creation pace, which was about 150,000 in the past year, it's estimated about 109,000 of those were illegals, foreign-born. This means we had about 40,000 jobs created for natives. That's it. In total, in the past 6 years, we've seen about 4.7 million jobs created for immigrants, both legal and illegal. And since June of 2023, a little more stats for you. Don't worry, I'll put all of this together for you in a second. The US has added a little over 2 million part-time jobs while losing 1.5 million part-time jobs or full-time jobs. So with the number of people who hold multiple jobs has jumped to an all-time high of over 8.5 million. In other words, yeah, we're adding part-time jobs, and there's a lot of people who are picking up several part-time jobs. So how is the economy? What's going on here, especially with the whole Chapter 11 thing? And I don't believe the economy is about to collapse. You know us. You know we're not those doom and gloomers, right? But let's add in the Democrats' inability to understand a functioning economy and what works. There's a massive influx of illegals. There's expansion of welfare assistance and programs at state and federal levels. We are about to see a massive growth in retirements, right? The boomers are coming of age of like, I'm done, I'm out of here, especially if the economy's not great. If they can make ends meet and rely on Social Security, that's what they're going to do, which is also another warning sign, red flag, right? And then you price in programs that attempt to get illegals into houses, which also strains the housing market. And you start to put these things together, and it's like, man, I don't think we're in a great position for the next couple of years. Now, what do I know? Not much. It's just enough to be dangerous. Okay, but what I can say is inflation is slowly cooling off. Prices of food, gas, and all that has slowed down in terms of inflation, right? Gas is actually down 10% from what it was last year. Okay, let's be realistic with ourselves. Food eaten at home is up about 9.9% as opposed to the multiple percentage points in the last couple of years. Interest rates seemingly have stabilized. They're about, what, 6 to 7%. But we're not seeing full-time job creation for native workers that we need to be. We're watching people pour into the multiple part-time job world, and we're watching, obviously, the creation of a lot of foreign-born workers, which the vast majority are going to be more lower skill, less specialized, more in the agriculture sector, the industrial sector, the construction sector, that kind of stuff, right? So what are they telling you? What's the establishment telling you? Well, of course, they're telling you, oh, well, GDP is up. It's 3.6, 3.0%. It's good. Things are growing. And GDP, it's this interesting thing. Well, we've talked about Paul. I was talking to Paul earlier today about this, and they use the same metrics year after year. So it's kind of like, okay, at some point it's when you break apart the pieces, it's not necessarily red flags on it, but I do question like the ways they put these things together. I mean, government spending is one of the categories that they add together for GDP. And it's like, well, I mean, government spending. That, to me, that's not great. You know, I don't want my government spending money, but some people would say, oh, well, that's good. The problem is debt, right? So they use consumer spending. I'm trying not to bore you guys with all the details, but I gotta show you some stuff in order to get you to what I think is going on and why this matters. But consumer spending, what they do is basically like, hey, are consumers spending more? Now, if you think about it, inflation has been crazy lately. You know, it's finally starting to cool off. But household debt is also increasing. So if we've got household debt increasing, right, it rose 109 billion in the third quarter of 2024. In other words, that consumption, it's actually being driven more by inflation and household debt, especially if you don't have job creation and wage growth, right? And debt drags progress. So you'll have those few people like a Robert Kiyosaki who says, no, debt is good. It's an asset. You use debt to create wealth. That's true, but the vast majority of people don't use debt to create wealth. They use it as a stopgap. So what they do is, I can't make ends meet, so I'll use a credit card to pay my bills and buy some food, and then I'll just pay it off. Well, that credit card's what, 20%, 24%? That debt is sucking money away from them, right? So it's a drag on their household progress. So to say, hey, that's valuable in terms of the GDP, I don't know, but this is where it gets shaky of like they'll tell you, oh, it's good because GDP is going up. Yeah, that's cool, but we've got to look at more metrics in something like this. And the whole reason that I'm talking about this, I know this is a bit off the beaten path for self-evident, but one of the things we want to get across to you guys is look into why you're being told what you're told. And this isn't necessarily they're always lying at you, but they'll try to trot out the most rosy things, right? The whole like immigration border crossings are down lower than even Trump. Why? Because they're funneling them in through ports of entry. So when you tell me, oh, well, border crossings are down, they expect the American public to go, oh, well, crossings are down, they're doing good, Trump's lying. When in reality, what they're really doing is they're trying to drive people away from just crossing the border and they're pushing them into ports of entry, which of course they're not rejecting them. They're taking them in and flying them where they want to go. And Harris administration's response, if you notice during that debate, the only economic policies they've really got, and I've watched more videos of her trying to answer economic questions, and she's basically talking about like hard work and ambition and drive and blah, blah, blah. It's money. You give money. The whole $25,000 for houses. And one thing that people are trotting out, and please be careful when you trot this next one out, because you got to know all the facts on it. It's the unrealized gains tax, this whole 25% unrealized gains tax. People are trying that out and putting out the numbers. And yes, the numbers are correct in what that would do, even if you haven't realized those gains. But the policy is for those who have over $100 million in assets. Otherwise, you end up looking like a fool when somebody says that's only for the really rich. That's not for you. Now, it's a lose-lose in my mind. So let's say it stays with $100 millionaires, $100 millionaires. They're going to act accordingly, and they're going to move away from investments which produce unrealized gains. This could be disastrous for investments and building up of new capital, which a woman who grew up with a Marxist professor father and has plenty of ties to the communist Chinese presence in San Francisco, along with Tim Walz, which we covered recently. She wants price controls and to attack the creation of capital through unrealized gains. Strange. The playbook is making itself clear. And let's say that unrealized gains tax doesn't just stick with $100 millionaires, which it won't. It will begin to lower the threshold, and suddenly mom and pop with maybe a $2 million retirement fund, suddenly they see themselves on the hook with a $500,000 tax bill. That's a punch in the gut. That's tough, right? And that's massive. So when you string all of these together, you look at there's no job growth for native born, for the large majority sector of white collar, specialized skills, information sectors, technology sectors, that kind of thing. There's not really job growth going on in there. You couple that with pressures, right? Now inflation and interest rates are starting to cool off. Okay, that's cool. Household debt, it's not outrageously climbing, but it's climbing, right? But then you look at the commercial sector. You say, okay, we're not adding massive numbers of specialized jobs. Yet, the commercial sector, you're seeing an increase in Chapter 11 bankruptcies, and you're seeing the commercial real estate that's about to really get walloped, right? And again, I was talking to Paul, and I kind of wonder, like, is this a move back towards industrial agriculture and construction, right? More of a industrial nation setup. Because if you're massively growing these foreign-born workers, and you're recognizing that people are the information and the technology and the more specialized fields are stagnating, And exports, let me show you this. Exports have progressively collapsed, right? This is net exports. So we're not exporting anything. We're year after year, we're importing more than we're exporting, which means we're not producing things of value. We're taking in things of value, purchasing those real things of value, right? And so you got to wonder, is this a great reset? Is it a shifting of the American economy on a whole? And you cannot say, oh, you're just being racist. I mean, look at what's going on with the Haitians in like Springfield and those types of cities. People are talking about, oh, they're going to the factories, right? So your factory work, your ag work, obviously for Latin Americans, and then your construction, which yeah, I worked roofing, right? Guess what? 95% of the guys were Guatemalan, Honduran, Ecuadorian, Mexican, right? There's pretty few white guys. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And so I do wonder, like, are are we kind of in for it as we see a massive shift in how America is structured? And I'm not running around with my hair caught on fire, but I was also having a conversation with somebody last night that you're witnessing this next generation, and here's where the hope is. They're they're recognizing the value of community, of locality, of setting down roots, of building family structure. And we're in a weird transition, right? Because we've very much been in this globalized structure for a while now, individualized structure. And I think this next generation, you are witnessing a group of people who are trying to figure out how to get back to their roots. Um, and you're watching the collapse of big things, and I mean that in size and scope. You're watching kind of a downfall of the establishment church movement. You're watching kind of I don't want to say a collapse, but a reorganization of what it means in terms of big corporations and all that. And again, there will always be big churches, there will always be big corporations, but where's the focus, right? And I do wonder, like, are you watching as this happens, a reordering of what it means to be a person living in America and how you interact with the rest of the world. Now, more purchases are going online, like Amazon and all that. You're seeing a consolidation, but I think you will see a growth of the local economy, right? And the person I was talking to last night, he was like, you're seeing more and more. These young kids are the ones going to the farmers markets and buying their food local. It's the old people who don't tend to care about that, right? They're used to their Walmart, their Winn-Dixie, and all of that. And I think he's right. I think the young people that I meet, they're more invested in relationship, they're more invested in health, they're more invested in homesteading, personal skills, that kind of stuff. So it's just, hear me out, but it's kind of an interesting time to be alive because you're watching what got set up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and it kind of peaked in the 2000s, 2010s, and I think it's just starting to curl back down, and that's okay. That's okay. But there will be some difficulties. There will be some tightness. There will be some struggle as we watch the transition. Now, I think politically, yes, you're gonna. We're at a crossroads. I am not one of those to say this election is the most important ever. I think this is basically the moment of doubling down or clawing back. And if Harris gets elected, it's a double down and it's a full throated shift, transformational shift of what really you could say before Obama, Bush kind of started, but Obama really put it to the rails and started it moving down the tracks. And I think Harris would complete the job. And you would see a massive regulation state You would see nationalization of companies. I do believe, and I'm not trying to be conspiracy theorist. You would see a crushing tax policy. You would see a rejection of free market capitalism in all its nature. Granted, Massey and I have talked about this. We are not in free market capitalism. Government should be an arbiter. Government should not be a part of the process. They should not be friends with companies. They should not be making deals with companies, should not be protecting companies, and they shouldn't be picking winners and losers, which we saw in COVID, right? And if you get Trump in office, you're going to see straightforward businessman style economy, which everybody's happy with. And yeah, I agree with you. But what happens after 4 years? Where are we at in 4 years, right? There's got to be a transformational fundamental shift from the bottom up. And that's where I encourage you guys of maybe don't resist the restructuring in terms of local um, finding jobs to create things of value. Like if your wife wants to make soap, cool, right? That soap is a valuable asset. It's a valuable item. People need soap, right? And if you want to grow excess food in your garden, sell it at the farmer's market, do it. Homesteading. You want to start process of homesteading. You want to own chickens, that kind of thing. Go for it, right? You are insulating yourself from some of the economic forces that could hurt you if you're completely reliant on the system. And I think there's hope in that of, man, the Lord has given you skills, he's given you talents and abilities. Why not pursue those? Right. And start thinking outside the box. Like if you can grow a garden, or let's say maybe you're making something of value to other people, right? And simplify it. You know, leather goods, right? Maybe you're buying leather from a local rancher after he butchers the cow, and you're making jackets, right? Now up north, that's extreme value, but and the cool thing is the internet can still be your medium. And I know I'm getting off topic a little bit, but I think when change comes, we can either be caught flat-footed or we can embrace it to a certain extent and we can be okay with it and open our hearts to, okay, Lord, how do you want me to embrace this change? What do you want me doing? How do you want me to see these things? Because if we can do that, if we can accept in faith that things are changing, when we step off that cliff and we don't hold on to the things that we typically want to hold on to, right? And that may even include your house, right? What does it look like to keep your hand open with the Lord? And you become much more of that buoy in the water as the waves rise and fall. You're riding with the rises and falls, um, as opposed to sinking under the tidal wave because you were holding on so tightly to that anchor that didn't really matter, right? And I get it, a house is a very important thing. I'm not saying a house doesn't matter, but you can open up your hand and go, you know what, Lord, if I have to lose it, I have to lose it, but I trust you. That's that's how you handle these situations. Instead of running around with your head cut off and screaming about the end of the world and how hyperinflation is going to kill us all, because it won't. You look at Weimar Germany, you look at Zimbabwe, you look at all these places, guess what? Every currency collapse in the history of the world, you know, they can usually string it along for a certain amount of time. But if if you look at Weimar Germany, you look at Zimbabwe, all these places that had hyperinflation, guess what? Most people survived, and you can too. And it may be a restructuring of everything, and that's okay. And that's honestly my hope is, Lord, I got faith that you're going to carry me through. It may not look right, it may be rough, but you're going to carry me through, and eternally I'm secure in you. So I do what I got to do in this life, and when you say, okay, you're at your end, so be it. Um, and I'm not making prophecies on it's all over. I'm not making prophecies on it's all going to get better and it's going to be great. I'll leave that to other people. But I will say God has given you skills, resources, ingenuity, and instead of burying that talent, go out and use it, right? You think about the parable of the talents, the one with the single talent, he buries it in a field. And that blew me away not too long ago. Wait a second. He had money, and at the very least, the master says you could at least put it in the bank. Very true. At the very least, he could have bought some seed and planted a crop, right? Like he planted the one thing that would not grow in that field when he could have used it to buy wheat seed or something. And he could have grown a crop, and at least that crop would have been a growth, right? So don't take your skills and bury them. At the very least, apply them in the field that they're supposed to be, and God will grow the crop, right? He'll grow it. He'll help you. He'll guide you. And when you're responsible with little, he'll give you more. And that's an encouragement of you can trust him in that process. You got to be willing to say yes, though. And you can't be afraid. You can't be afraid to take that step. And I get it, fear comes up. Totally understand. You got to answer that fear with faith. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Not that long, but I wanted to throw you some of those numbers, especially this whole chapter 11 bankruptcy thing. It is commiserate. It signs along with a sense of what has happened in crises. And you look at the market is, by pretty much all indicators, very overvalued. That's kind of a whole different topic. But you start putting these things together, and it's like, where are we headed? Especially if you get a Harris administration, which is not going to help things at all, and not going to help things. This is where I say, just be prepared with creative solutions. Start setting up those creative solutions now. I'm not telling you just go out and buy a bunch of dried food and buy ammunition because it's all going to collapse. No, be prepared, do what you need to do, but invest in some alternatives, right? And it could be as simple as selling soap, or learning how to can and being able to sell that. Selling crops you make, making simple things. Heck, learning some woodworking skills and learning how to make a chair. You can sell a chair, and I think you're going to see kind of a refinement of what it needs to live and produce. So I'll leave it there. Guys, we love you so much. We're so grateful for you, thankful for everything you do. Please, by all means, go to theselfevidenttruth.com. Get yourself a shirt, right? Just like this. And if you wish to become a monthly sponsor, monthly member of the Torchbearers, by all means, go to theselfevidenttruth.com. Click that donate button. Become a member. Help support us in what we're doing. So I'm going to sign off, give you the sign off screen. Guys, I love you. Have a great day.